When I write and speak and advocate and talk with legislators, I often talk about how social issues, all social issues, really should be child centric. How if you prioritize children, you get the right answer on questions about sex segregated locker rooms or men playing on girls' sports or pornography or drag queen story hour or questions about reproductive technologies or education issues. And I mean, every major culture war issue, actually, you can find incredible clarity when you center the child.
Hi again, everybody. Welcome back to The Narrative. Mike Andrews and Aaron Baer in a very unfamiliar situation. Aaron, when was the last time you and I sat down across the table from each other?
And we still don't have all three of us here. One day, I promise you, David still works here. It's all like we all still like each other for the most part.
Can you promise that at this point?
No, exactly.
We just don't know what next week will bring.
Exactly, what's all going to actually happen. But yeah, it's good to be back.
It's good to see you, man.
Yeah,
it really is. I'm glad to be having this conversation because we've got some really exciting news that it caught me off guard this week.
Yeah,
I don't know.
all of us off guard.
Okay, yeah. I just wanted to be sure I wasn't out of the loop. But for our listeners who might not know, House Bill 68 is now in effect in Ohio.
Yeah, the SAFE Act, so the bill banning trans medicine on kids and Save Women's Sports. The Franklin County judge issued a pretty sweeping ruling upholding the law. I mean, rejecting, I think it was all 4 or 5 counts, every count. It was either 4 or 5 different arguments. I think it was 4 from the ACLU and allowing the law to go into effect, which is just, we were talking about this morning in prayer. Like, I don't know if there's a bipolar thing going on here, and I'm probably in trouble for making that joke, but like, literally, you read his preliminary injunction ruling, where he issued the preliminary injunction blocking the law from going into effect. And his arguments there are almost completely counter to what he put in here. And I've got theories, and I'm sure we can unpack some of that. But I think for all of us, we were completely floored when this happened and excited because I genuinely thought it could be years before this went into effect. And now Nationwide Children's Hospital better shut their clinic down, or people are going to, they're going to be breaking the law in Ohio, and that's huge.
Yeah, and girls' sports are protected as well. Competitions are going to be fair and safe for our girls in Ohio.
Heading right into the new school year. I mean, honestly, like it could not be. There's still stuff like that is just sort of sinking in. Like, wow, this happened. Now we still got a ways to go as well too, but it was incredible.
Yeah, the journey of the SAFE Act and Save Women's Sports through the court system isn't necessarily done, but the big takeaway from this week is that it is in effect. It is the law in Ohio.
It is the law right now. So right now, they can't do these procedures on kids. As the school year starts, I know my kids go back to school next week. Like, they cannot be girls cannot be forced to compete against boys in OHSAA competitions and in university sports. I mean, it really is a huge deal.
So to refresh our listeners' memories on this, there were a couple of different challenges, and one was about this single subject clause that we had covered pretty thoroughly when we talked about it. Just a quick refresher on that for anybody who might have seen that language and just needs to remember what it was.
Yeah, there were really 2 things in this decision that came out that were surprising and really encouraging. And I especially want to make sure on the second one, we talk about the incredible work that Dave Yost did here, our Attorney General. But the first one was the single subject challenge, which there's a broad constitutional provision in Ohio that says legislation passed by the General Assembly can only have one subject, can only deal with one thing. That's one of those things that sounds really good. The reality with it is it's a fairly subjective idea. What's happened over the years, I mean, decades, is that it's typically, that's interpreted pretty broadly. In this case, in the preliminary injunction that Judge Holbrook issued in Franklin County, he took a really incredibly narrow perspective on saying this was not a single subject. And his whole argument was, well, you had 2 bills that each had their own names in the SAFE Act and Save Women's Sports Act that were combined into one bill. Therefore, this is now 2 subject and it violates it. Well, that was an absurd argument to make, and really the counter argument to that is the argument Judge Holbrook put in his decision overturning it, which says, no, actually, it's all one subject. It's dealing with how do we address transgenderism in children, right? I think he put in in his actual decision, how do we address how do we regulate transgender people, right? Or how does the law interact with transgender people? Like, yeah, there's some bills where I'm like, yeah, that's a stretch saying that's a single subject. This very clearly was a single subject. And when he issued that ruling, the preliminary injunction, that was why when we got on the podcast a few months ago when that came down, I was like, we're gonna win this, because if Judge Holbrook's interpretation of single subject is upheld, if this is the new standard, every bill the General Assembly is maybe not a strong majority of the bills passed by the General Assembly very well would have violated
certainly
that
the lame
law.
duck bills that just look like a Thanksgiving turkey. That has just all kinds of stuff.
They're actually called Christmas tree bills, because you just throw every gift anybody wants gets thrown into that bill, and not least of which the state budget becomes a violation of the single subject bill, because so much. I mean, it's literally about 70% of the policy, maybe 80% of the policy that's enacted in every General Assembly happens in that budget, and so. It was an absurd thing. So we felt really good that we were going to win on that. And again, Judge Holbrook himself gave us the victory there.
Yeah. And then you mentioned the work that Dave Yost did as part 2 of this, really turning the tide on House Bill 68.
Yeah. And this is the big part that is going to get a little wonky here. And I'm going to try to break it down as much as possible. This is where Dave Yost really needs to win, because I will tell you, having done this work for a number of years, having been in an attorney general's office, what he did in this case is absolutely phenomenal. And most of the time, conservative attorneys general don't do this, what he did. And they brought what was called a substantive due process challenge to the SAFE Act and Save Women's Sports, basically saying that the General Assembly doesn't have the right under the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment to pass this law, right? That they are violating the basic rights, the basic equal protection under the law of individuals who identify as the opposite sex. And typically the way that type of claim, especially related to abortion and transgenderism, on its face, the way conservative attorneys general typically attack this claim is they purely argue the legal theory. Because from a legal theory side, especially from an originalist theory side, that argument that the ACLU brought is nonsensical. It's a child's claim is the way they sort of look at that. Because ultimately, what most conservative attorneys general do is they say, listen, the General Assembly absolutely has the right to regulate medical practices. We do this all the time. There's countless things that we say, yes, you can do this procedure. No, you can't do that. Yes, you can regulate abortion this way. No, you can't do this kind of thing. This is so common practice that it's that we don't even need to get to the substance of what we're arguing. Of course we can do this. And so we take this sort of, high-minded, I'm reminded of what Mark Brnovich, the Arizona Attorney General, used to say, this cake eater mindset of like, we know what's best. This is a stupid legal theory. And we don't engage in the actual debate around the medical science around it. Then what the ACLU does, or what Planned Parenthood does, is they come to the fight and they flood the court with medical experts and flood the court with these medical associations. And they basically box the judge into a corner with medical experts and are like, wait a minute, you're going to, with the entire medical establishment is saying that this is bad science, that this is bad medicine, that this is harmful, and you're going to let them get away with this? And they have this entire debate around medicine, and we don't challenge it. We kind of just grant all their, we literally, I've actually seen it happen where we grant all of their premises and we're like, despite all of that, we still have the right, we're the General Assembly, we can do what we want. And we get our butts kicked every time. We lose every time when that happens. However, this time, And I'm starting to see this more and more, but I don't think you'll find a better example of than what Dave Yost did in this case. This time, we did not give them an inch. Our side, the good guys, did not give them an inch. We challenged, you saw Dave Yost come in there and challenge every medical expert, right? If you're going to bring this guy forward, we're going to depose him. You're going to make this claim, we're going to fight it. We're going to make our own claims and make you respond to them. What that meant, and again, get really legalese here, is that the Judge Holbrook said, all the General Assembly needs to prove is the rational basis standard, right? They just have to show a rational basis. Typically what ends up happening is when the left floods the court with all these medical experts, they say the state needs to get over the strict scrutiny standard and show that there's the highest, reason for having to do this. Well, Judge Holbrook said, nope. Basically what he said is, I'm going to call it a draw between the medical science here, and which again I think is pretty silly, because it is certainly not a draw that boys cannot become girls. But for the point of the case, that's fine. We're going to call it a draw and just say, you know what, because it's a draw, go ahead, General Assembly, do what you want, and we won. That in and of itself, again, that's one of those things you'll never see that really in a political ad anywhere because it's so in the weeds. But this is the type of things we should be expecting from our Attorney General in particular, and Dave Yost and his Solicitor General Elliot Geiser just went above and beyond in how they argued this case.
Yeah, it was big news this week. We were really thrilled to hear it. Got some other big news this week on the national stage, and that was that the presidential election ticket is officially set. Kamala Harris, officially the nominee, and she nominated Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota, to be her vice president. And just not a guy I knew a lot about, but I've seen that media spin pick up, and we're already seeing what type of guy that he is. And the right's kind of saying, well, this is one of the most extreme candidates you could see. And the left's like, this is a great pick. Nobody could possibly think that this grandpa from the Midwest is an extremist. But as always, the truth is not to be believed by what the media is saying.
Well, I'll say I was pretty excited by the pick because of all the people. I think this makes a very stark comparison out there, because Tim Walz, has a track record, a very stark track record on where he stands on issues, right? Let's set aside I think there's a lot of stuff out there that is legitimate on the stolen valor stuff and all that, and you just look at his positions on policy, and you have a really stark vision of what's going on here. The way he handled COVID, right? The way he handled the violence in the cities, and especially in Minneapolis and St. Paul. The way his radical pro-abortion stance, his position on things like the SAFE Act and Save Women's Sports Act. I mean, I think this is such a great example of. I'm quoting my old boss Mark Brnovich a lot here, of personnel being policy. And he's not the one that came up with that, but obviously he would say that all the time. But you look at, if there's any question of how Donald Trump would govern or Kamala Harris would govern, the most substantive policy decision they've made says a lot about how they would govern. And you have Donald Trump picking somebody in J.D. Vance, who's been very strongly pro-life, been very strongly pro-family, great on religious freedom. And then you have Tim Walz, who is really an opposite on a lot of those issues. And I also just have to say, I was shocked by this because I think you talk to most Republican operatives, and they would have told you the person that they feared the most of Kamala picking was Josh Shapiro. Mm-hmm. He is incredibly talented. He is a brilliant speaker, very charismatic,
and from a pretty important
state. And from a very important state, exactly. And universally, everybody said that all the Republican operatives I know said that was going to be the one they were most afraid of. And I think that was pretty generally accepted, and the Wall Street Journal covered this pretty well. The fact that Kamala didn't pick him just shows how deep the anti-Semitism is, that the fact that Josh Shapiro is Jewish says a lot. And again, that's one of those things, Mike, from a big picture cultural thing. That's something we have to watch, because again, as the world gets crazier, this was what you listeners know. I'm Jewish. I actually just saw my 96-year-old grandmother last week. But I remember one time when I was in college, she said to me, sooner or later when the world goes crazy, everyone blames the Jews. And I think you're kind of seeing that right now. And so that's something that we as Christians need to be very mindful of. We need to be ready to defend our Jewish neighbors and stand up for them. And I think you're starting to see some of those signs in America today.
Yeah, and we're ramping up our election education efforts as well. And to the point you made about personnel and policies and all that, we're very much taking that approach of it's policies, not necessarily the politicians, that Christians need to be engaged in. Like, not need to, have to, like, cannot stress it enough.
Absolutely.
You have to be engaged at the policy level in this election.
Yep.
Because there are some of those extreme things like we're seeing that are out there.
Absolutely.
We're going to take a quick break here, and we've got a great interview coming up with Katy Faust. We're going to talk about the new book from Them Before Us called Pro-Child Politics. Should be a great conversation, and we're looking forward to bringing it to you next on The Narrative. Hey, Narrative listeners. Christians in the marketplace today face more unique and challenging threats than ever before. Businesses are following woke capitalism, chambers of commerce are beholden to social justice, and secular activists are chipping away Christians' First Amendment rights. As Ohio's only Christian chamber of commerce, the Christian Business Partnership stands in the gap to advocate for, to educate, and to celebrate Christian business owners. Joining the partnership also allows businesses to provide their employees with healthcare insurance, workers' compensation, and exclusive banking and educational discounts. To find out more and to join, go to cbpohio.org. That's cbpohio.org. And we are back on The Narrative. Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, Maria Baer joining us for the interview today. And we are going to talk here with Katy Faust about the new book that Them Before Us is releasing next month called Pro-Child Politics. And just a little bit about Katy before we jump into our conversation. She's the founder and president of Them Before Us, which is a global movement defending children's rights to their mother and father. She publishes and speaks and testifies widely on why marriage and family are matters of justice for children. She's had articles that have appeared in a number of publications, and this Pro-Child Politics is actually her third book. She and her husband are raising 4 children in the Seattle area. And Katy, it is so good to have you here on The Narrative as a second-time guest.
And Maria's a second-time guest as well. Yeah, that's true.
Well,
Yes, yeah, right.
Favorite.
Yeah,
Winning.
exactly.
Is
Right.
basically
yeah.
her status on the podcast.
Yeah.
I love it. Twinning with Maria is always the way I want to start out every show.
Yes. Well, Katy, just let me ask you to get us started with kind of an overview of what the book is. I think the title pretty well says it, but just talk to us about the format of the book and what you hope to accomplish with it.
Yeah, Master of the Obvious with that title is what I was going for. And it's an extension of the work that we do at Them Before Us, which is to put them, the children, before us, the adults, on all matters related to marriage and family. And it's pretty much just centering the child in all of these conversations, whether it's in the courtroom or the culture, the personal or the political. So that's the thrust of what Them Before Us does, is marriage and family work. When I write and speak and advocate and talk with legislators, I often talk about how social issues, all social issues, really should be child-centric. How if you prioritize children, you get the right answer on questions about sex-segregated locker rooms, or men playing on girls' sports, or pornography, or drag queen story hour, or questions about reproductive technologies or education issues. And I mean, every major culture war issue, actually, you can find incredible clarity when you center the child. And I've often wondered, can you do this on all of politics? If you centered the child, if you prioritize their rights and well-being on every major issue that we vote on at every election, what would happen? And the answer is you get great policy. So that's what this book is about, is taking the Them Before Us lens and saying, let's apply that to energy policy and how we talk about the environment and immigration and national security, debt, taxes, education, masculinity, femininity, policing, all of the different issues that come up over and over and over, whether it's at the Thanksgiving table or in the election booth. let's look at it from the perspective of child protection. And it actually serves as a very clarifying metric to discern who and what we should be voting for.
So, Katy, that's no accident this book is coming out, what are we, 6 weeks before, 5 weeks before the election? You know, let me ask, as you're looking at the political landscape right now and you're seeing the conversation of all the candidates, not just president, but otherwise, who do you see getting this concept? Who do you see really driving this well? What are examples that people can point to and say, okay, this person or this candidate or this political figure, maybe they're not on the ballot this time, really understands this framework?
Any party that adopts the pro-child framework is going to win. Because there is something about don't touch the kids that resonates with every American. There really is a unifying force that comes when you say, you know what, I want to hide your child's transgender identity from you at school. Or I think that it's a great idea to saddle newborn children with $70,000 of debt the moment that they're born. There's something in all of us that say, leave the kids alone. Back off from the kids. And the book kind of explains, if you really have that leave the kids alone, let's protect them mentality, we can flesh out what that looks like on all these different political, cultural, national issues. And especially a lot of the human issues, right? We spend a lot of time on issues that intersects with what does it mean to be human. And one of those chapters is written by Maria Baer, which I want to hear a little more from her about that, about digital technology and the way that we are interfacing, with machines in a way that's really damaging, not just children, but all of society. So when you're looking at the current political landscape, the party options, I would say, unfortunately, there is one party that seems to be anti-child in every way you can be anti-child, every way you can be anti-child, whether it is violating their right to life, violating their right to their mother and father, violating their bodily integrity, their right to have an unmedicalized, intact body, their right to innocence, their right to have a mind that is opened to the good, the true, and the beautiful through education, their right to not be saddled by a burden of debt, a crushing load because we had to pay for somebody's inaugural library or signature, bridge in some county that, the kid's never going to cross, because we've misused our foreign policy agenda and aims in a way that makes our kids less safe than we were growing up. I mean, there is one party that seems to utterly reject everything that children need to flourish, unfortunately. And I would say that there's one party that is much better positioned to fight on behalf of children, even though I would personally say that party, the GOP, took a hit, especially related to their platform a couple weeks ago, by weakening a couple core aspects that are aimed directly at child protection and thriving in the way that they spoke about life and family. But on a lot of other issues like the environment, like energy, like foreign policy, like immigration, like gender ideology, the GOP is better positioned to implement a lot of the policies we outline in the book.
So Katy, I want to come back to the GOP platform, but I do want to get to because the format of the book is really interesting. And I've gotten a sneak peek of one of those chapters because you have multiple different writers.
One?
I know.
Dude,
you had multiple people write different chapters on different topics, and Maria wrote the chapter on technology. So Ree, could you just talk a little bit about what that chapter is? And what you found in really investigating the topic.
Yes. So when Katy asked me to write this chapter on digital tech, I was like, I can't even figure out how to use the GPS on my phone. I'm not sure I'm a person.
That's accurate, actually. That's
Aaron can attest to that. But what Katy said and what was really helpful, I'm sure this is reflected, through the rest of the book as well, was that this is not about the nuts and bolts of technology and how it works, but this is, again, about how to look at issues from the perspective of children's rights and their needs and desires, as well as how we're currently approaching policy in this area, which for more issues than less are always prioritizing the needs and wants of adults over the needs and wants of kids. And I found several really fascinating kind of trails of investigation through this chapter. One of the main things I looked at, so for example, at the end of each chapter, Katy asked all of us who are contributing to the book to, we're not just spending these chapters railing against like, oh, we've done this poorly. At the end of each chapter, where a lot of us are bringing up ideas for ways to move forward, good policies in these areas. And one of the small, not insignificant, but simple things that we can do, I think, in the area of tech is a really good illustration of what Katy's talking about when she says we need to put the needs of kids first, and that you can do this in policy and in culture and in family life. So when you get an iPhone or you get some piece of smart tech, did any sort of digital technology, 9 times out of 10, the factory settings of these devices are in the most permissive possible. So when you get a phone out of its case, if you want to give this phone to a younger person, I would recommend against giving a smartphone to anyone younger than at least 15, I think. But if you wanted to give it to a teenager or a younger person and you want to turn on some parental controls, the burden is on you when you get the phone out of the package to navigate the often very complicated settings of the devices to find these controls and to turn them on. I did an interview a few months ago with a guy who runs an organization called Protect Young Eyes, and their mission is to protect kids from internet pornography. And he was kind of walking me through how this works. When you get an iPhone, it takes 30 some steps to get the phone in the most sort of locked down version possible if you were going to give that phone to a younger person. That is a very simple fix. The companies know how to reverse that. It really should be the other way around. But this is a perfect kind of encapsulation of the problem, which is that when we design these phones and sell them, the person we have in mind, the consumer we have in mind, is a grown-up, is an adult. And so we're going to sell it to the adults. The problem is a lot of these big tech companies are also marketing these devices specifically to children and to schools that are going to put them in classrooms. So once you're doing that, once we know that these are going to be in the hands of kids, not even just accidentally, but on purpose in the hands of kids, I think the responsible pro-kid thing to do is to make these phones and devices come out of their package, again, in the most locked down version possible. The burden should be on parents and teachers and classrooms and grown-ups to figure out how to get that device where we want it. That way it protects kids. And so that's one of the really kind of simple ways of looking at it. I also looked in the chapter, just kind of did an overview about the idea of what digital tech in particular does when we try to approach it as a way to not just help us do something more efficiently, because there's a lot of good that technology has done, but ways that we're kind of even subtly expecting tech to replace something about the human experience or to meaningfully replicate it. So, for example, when we say that, we have all these educational apps for kids and they can learn how to read on this digital platform or whatever it is. First of all, the guidelines for what can be called educational are very, very lax. I mean, there's no gatekeepers. But secondly, we know from research and just the way the human mind and the human body works, reading on a screen is very, very different from reading something on paper and something in analog. We retain more information and we remember it for longer when we read it on paper as opposed to reading it on the screen. I'm not opposed at all to using digital technology in education or reading books on it or whatever. But we have to consider who kids are and at what stage of their learning and development they are when we introduce that kind of tech for that purpose. And I think that points to a bigger reality, which is we were made as bodies and minds. That's how God made people. We're not just bodies. We're not just minds. A lot of the digital tech in the education space treats kids as if they're just minds. But we have to consider the fact that our bodies are a huge part of how we learn as well. And when tech ignores that part of us, we're not learning how to write. We're not learning writing in cursive anymore. We're all this digital tech is kind of replacing that. It harms kids' education.
So, Maria, and then actually, Katy, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this too. This gets to the, one of the broader premises of them before us. But I think the them or the us in this context is actually the corporations. Large corporations I want to refer to here. What impact, especially first in the technology space, but then Katy, maybe in other spaces, the sort of profit motives of these large companies that are producing that. How is that framing that? Because what you just said there, one of the things that really jumped out is like all of the data, the science. We know how kids learn and the best ways to learn. This isn't like,
it's not like the after April 2020, right when COVID hit, and we're still trying to figure out how this virus is moving, and there's a lot of freak out. Like, we know a lot of these things, and the things that tech is pushing is explicitly violating those principles, yet we're going along. What's the profit motive? How is that playing out in all of this stuff?
Oh, I think it's huge in the tech world. I mean, Google in 2014, Google sent some number in the tens of millions of Chromebooks to public schools across the country. And this was a brilliant marketing strategy because they knew, that schools are going to, when you send something to a school, they're going to accept it. A lot of schools need tech and they're hungry for more devices. But B, if you give kids a device at school, they're going to ask for it at home. And then the parents are going to ask for it, or the parents are going to want to get it for their kids and that kind of thing. So this was marketing. I don't necessarily object to that from a business standpoint. What I do object to is Google, and there's a lot of documentation. I actually included in the chapter in this book, something that, from the marketing materials of Google. They will suggest that this is going to revolutionize the classroom. This is going to improve upon, this is going to make teaching easier. It's going to make learning better. And they know it doesn't do any of that. So market all you want, but don't lie. And that's what's happening. And also, we just have to be real. These companies have enormous lobbying budgets. They are lobbying people in Washington, D.C., and they're lobbying lawmakers who maybe don't spend a lot of time either thinking about the needs or desires of kids, or who maybe don't know, like, yes, the research is out there, but maybe they don't know it. Maybe they don't think about it a lot. And, this also goes to, JD Vance's comment. I know he's getting a lot of heat for making that comment about leaders who don't have children. But this is one of those areas where you can kind of see that playing out. When people who have kids might know more about this, or they have a bigger stake in learning about what tech does to their kids and for their kids. So if you have lawmakers who have children, for example, and have watched their child struggle with screen addiction or struggle to learn with their screen apps, they are in a better position to know better when these lobbyists come forward. But I think the profit motive is a big deal.
Yeah, Katy, where else are we seeing this kind of thing now?
Okay, so let me just highlight kind of a distinctive about this book, which I don't know, like, am I arrogant to think that there's nothing that's been done like this ever before?
Katy, I don't think there's anything that's been done like this.
Katy,
Okay.
I will just say, though, that's one of mine and Maria's favorite things. You know what no one's talking about?
Yeah.
9 times out of 10 when people, but this might be the 1 out of 10 where people are saying this, where that
Exactly.
But I'll tell you why, because Maria did us all a huge favor and dove in and explored every corner of this aspect of digital technology and gave us 3,000 words on it, and gave us 3,000 words on how to think about it, not just how to think about it for 2024, but the overarching principles so that we can continue to confront threats that digital technology poses as it morphs and evolves in our lives and the lives of our kids. She outlined, and this is what I said for all of the different authors, because I'm pulling in these absolute brainiacs, like Maria, and these people that have been doing, national security work for, 20 years, working on foreign policy and immigration issues. And Grover Norquist wrote my taxes chapter. I mean, these people are absolute experts. And I said, what you need to do is, I want you to outline the lies. What are the lies about digital technology that we're believing? What are the lies about taxes you always hear? What are the lies about immigration you're constantly having to refute? And then how do those lies harm kids? And now tell me the truth about taxes. Tell me the truth about immigration. Tell me the truth about digital technology. And if we were to implement and believe those truths, how would it protect kids? How would it benefit them? And so that's what Maria did. She drilled down into what are the profit motives going on here. But what she really did is gave everybody a rubric where they can parse out and reject the false promises of digital technology and understand how to properly integrate it into your life, but especially your children's lives. So I'm gonna just brag on Maria for a second here. I'm gonna tell you the lies about digital technology that she kind of pulled out of this massive amount of information that she dove into, the interviews that she's had, the research that she's done. And she's like, here's the lies. And I'm like, yep, that's what they are. Lie number 1. The only thing dangerous about digital technologies for kids is harmful content, right? Because don't you hear well, as long as it's not porn, well, it's fine. No, that's a lie. Lie number 2, digital technology can educate. Well, if you don't have a full understanding of what it means to be a human and a human child, maybe you can believe that, right? But Maria, because she's got a very extensive background, not just in the world of journalism, but in a full, robust understanding of the human person, she's able to talk with you about that fallacy. And then number three, if we can do something, we should do something. If we have the technology to do it, shouldn't we do it? And so she knocks down all of those different lies. And to me, it was very, very helpful, very helpful to be like, yeah, that is the way that I need to filter that. Yes, I do need to be aware of that kind of marketing, or just that kind of like me being wooed into the ease that might come with handing my kid a device in the name of education.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point just from my own perspective as a parent, because we were in the thick of COVID. All of our kids were those who got sent home with Chromebooks. And we found out pretty quickly, like, this is actually not helping them. This is hindering their ability to learn. And then we're also told by the school, we can't really do anything as parents beyond the content guidelines that they put on the machines. And guess what? Kids are really crafty and they can still get around those in ways that aren't helpful. So we found it to be a real battle with these Chromebooks that are coming home from schools without really our permission or consent, because it's just how they learn now. And so we've taken, I think, some control back by saying, well, we've got kids who need to be homeschooled because they need to be in paper books or that types of things. And I think just parents understanding they've got that permission and they've got those options and alternatives is huge.
That is huge. And I applaud that. I also think it is, it's crazy that if you want your kid to be reading paper books, you're considering homeschool. Like, you can't require. We are, like, the parents, we have the right to speak into how our school districts work. When our daughter was handed a tablet in kindergarten, I asked her teacher, like, is this necessary? Does she really need this? And she said, I know it's not ideal, but the state kindergarten readiness test is done digitally. So she needs to learn. And you'll hear this argument all the time. Like, well, they need to learn how to use it because they're going to have to use it later as an adult.
Which, again, is just real quick. That's the dumbest argument, because none of us had this technology when we were kids, and we're all using it just fine now. It's not like you can't figure out how to. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I mean,
I don't know, but like us Gen Xers, we're getting skipped over for everything. So maybe there really was a deficit. I mean, well, you guys are millennials, aren't you? So you're having your time in the sun.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But we have the ability, and I would say the responsibility, to ask our school districts, to lobby them as parents, to request, don't make the test exclusively digital.
Yeah.
Like, we have that ability to do that. And I think there's a lot of data, at least in the earlier grades, that would back up, not wanting to do that that's not what's best.
Yeah. The other thing too, Ree, that you talked about on, I love that concept of making the devices as strictly locked up as possible. It reminds me, because what the tech companies say on these things is, oh, well, we can't do that. That's so difficult. But it reminds me of the one time I've been semi-grateful for sports gaming, sports gambling, was, they've tried to pass sports betting in states like Ohio for years. They finally did it a couple of years ago. For some reason, gratefully, most lawmakers were like, no, we're not going to do this. We're not going to do this. Even the teams wouldn't do it. Well, the money started becoming so big behind this stuff that they were like, well, we really have to do it. And but what was the big pushback on it was, well, how do you stop underage people from gambling? How do you stop this? Well, all of a sudden, they got the ability to do age verification on websites and apps. And it was like, wow, you guys could do this. Well, now that we're talking age verification, what about all of these porn sites, right? You guys have been telling us literally, I mean, for years, I mean, going back to when I was in Arizona, that, no, well, we can't do age verification on websites. There's just no way of doing it. Well, now that billions of dollars are on the line, you guys have figured out how to do this. And now you're seeing this massive move. And that's, to me, again, that gets back to, and this is one of the things I'm grateful that JD Vance has really highlighted, is that, corporate America is not our friend on these issues. And they do everything they can to, they have one agenda, and it's certainly not the well-being of our kids.
I will say that we do have a chapter written by John Schweppe at the American Principles Project specifically on pornography. And he spends a lot of time talking about age verification and how those laws are really driving porn out of several states. And APP has spearheaded that. So it is possible to protect our kids from tech, but there certainly is a lack of will on behalf of the people that are turning them into consumers of these products. And so it's just one more reason for us, not just as parents, but as voters, to be very, very aware of the kind of policies that, our politicians are promoting and figure out, like, actually, I can hold your feet to the fire in this. And there actually are things that we can do about it. And it isn't hopeless. And, here's the truth. And the other thing that I love about this project is we constructed this book not from a place of, oh, we're anti-porn, or we're Luddites, we're anti-tech, or we're anti-gay, or we're anti-immigrant, or, we're against, education, or we're isolationists, or we're the world's policeman, or whatever. Like all of these sort of you're against this, you're against that a lot of times conservatives kind of get pigeonholed into. No, this is because we are for kids. We are very, very clear in every chapter that this is not about being against you, against that, anti this. We are pro-child. And if you look at all of these issues from the perspective of centering the child, the rights and well-being of the child, what you end up getting is incredible policy that leads to social flourishing
and leads to cohesion. Katy, this is, I still remember when we had what was it, dinner at our friend's house down in Cincinnati, and what you've done here with them before us, I think is so important for sort of, and I would say explicitly for CCV as a Christian organization, for the Christian political movement, is it brings cohesion. I think what we saw here in Ohio is that while I'm fine being labeled a social conservative, there's some function in that title. One of the general ideas of social conservatism has actually worked really hard against us because we silo every issue, right? So if you're a social conservative, that means you think abortion's bad. We don't like gay marriage. We want to protect religious freedom. Like there's these siloed issues, but they're kind of attacked individually, right? And I think the biggest thing that jumped out to me, and the listeners to the podcast have heard us talk about this before, is on the abortion amendment that just passed here. A better indicator for voting no on the abortion amendment was being married compared to having kids. Right? Which is counterintuitive, right? You'd think if you've had kids, you're more likely to vote no on this thing. But actually people who were married was a better indicator. There was a lot of people who had kids that were cool with abortion. And I would just argue that I think we tried to, especially on the right to life, we tried to silo that out and say, well, you can be pro-gay marriage and you can be, in a hermetically sealed box. That's true, right? You can be pro no fault divorce and pro polygamy and be pro life and still think it's wrong to kill an unborn child. But practically speaking, if you don't understand the whole ethic and the whole issue, and again, whether you're surrounding that whole ethic on a biblical grounds, or I think what you've done here with pro-child politics, which I also think is a biblical grounds, but is not explicitly Christian, you get that cohesion. What's been your experience kind of, because you've kind of splashed into this whole conservative world generally. What's been the response back from people who are like, well, we're social conservatives or things like that? What's been your experience on that?
Well, I have to say real quick before Katy answers that, I can personally attest to, the sharpening aspect of marriage, because you've been wrong on so many things. And I can only imagine what you'd be like if you didn't work a lot.
What are we doing here? This is not what this was supposed to be. That's a good question. Sorry. Anyway,
interview's wrapping up in like 10 minutes. The counseling session begins right after.
Right.
Good.
Exactly right.
We'll just keep it on here later. Yeah, I'm so far outside the Beltway. Like, they don't even realize, they can't even calculate my time zone correctly. I'm that far out. Please, I'm out here on the West Coast, on the left coast. And so I do think it aids itself in a little bit of a fresh perspective, partially because I'm not siloed in and I don't understand that there's these maybe natural or have been constructed walls between the different aspects of conservatism. Maybe it's because we're in the fight for our life out here. And like, you just have to get very, very serious very quick, and you have to let the non-essentials melt away and go hard after the things that actually do matter. I've got a chapter on policing in this, book, and it's not an abstract concept. We are the ones that are dealing with the absolute devastation of, wrecked buildings and businesses and longer wait times. I mean, like, we're in a place where we're like, I think it adds to clarity. But what you're saying about a cohesive narrative is 100% true. Like, the other side, the left, is always it's amazing the ways that they can fit in all of their different issues into their pet projects. Like, climate change is responsible for decreased in IVF rates. And I mean, like, it amazes me the ways that they tie everything into their pet causes. And why is it? Because they have this overarching rubric of like liberation, right? And the oppressed and the oppressor. I mean, like, progress. They can always find a way to have that be the thread that weaves through everything that they're doing. And we don't have that. Sometimes it's religious liberty. Sometimes it's individual rights. Sometimes it's kind of social conservative, like, human flourishing. But there isn't anything where we can say this is the thing that unites all of our different issues until now. I actually think that looking at the next generation and prioritizing their rights and well-being is what connects all of these different issues together. And I think it was Molly Hemingway in her review of the book that said, what do you get when you prioritize kids? You get conservative policy. And like, I don't know where else, and maybe because I'm not as dialed into the conservative machine, but where else are social, economic, and national policy conservatives all found under the same roof? I don't know.
What I'll tell you, the place you see it most right now, and he might have been a part of this book. I know you guys are friends as well, but Kevin Roberts at the Heritage Foundation, and this is what we did with CCV, again, not to, talk about us too much here, but that we wanted to say, when I came in here 8 years ago, we weren't going to be life, marriage, and family and religious freedom. We were going to be public policy that reflects the truth of the gospel. God's word speaks to all aspects of life. And for some reason, we've pigeonholed ourselves into this handful of quote unquote social issues. And then we see, actually, what really runs the world is money, right? And the profitization of exploiting kids and exploiting these systems and processes that have big bucks. Again, I was talking to somebody about this earlier this week. The most significant piece of legislation passed in the last 15 years is Obamacare. And if you take the way the left has used that to just profit off of their political agenda, unlike anything else, right? You take what they've done with pharmaceuticals, you take what they've done with gender clinics, with the drug epidemic. Everything has now been monetized for them to drive their agenda and build up their organ. And that's why they have so much cash now, more than ever before.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and what's
Right.
perverse about it is that, like, from their perspective too, if they were honest, if they were approaching their supposed oppressor oppressed kind of, we are here for the underdog and the most vulnerable rubric, they would be for kids, but they're not, because what group of people is more marginalized, has less of a voice at the table, and is more vulnerable than children? There is none, right? And that encompasses every other challenge that a person faces in society. So if they're not going to do it, then we have to take seriously that they're not interested in doing it, because they're claiming that that's who they are, that they defend the underdog, but that's not what they're doing.
Yeah, and that's a great point. The left is concerned about children. I think a lot of people on the left really do love kids and are concerned about them. But when it comes to leftist priorities, they're interested in children only to the extent that the kids can advance the political football for their pet causes, which very, very often result in the destruction of children, either their actual lives, their families, their bodies, their minds, their futures. And they often do it in the name of helping kids, sometimes in the name of children's rights. So we have to be very clear about who children are, what they need, where they come from, to what they have a natural right, what leads to their flourishing. And the contributors of Pro-Child Politics focus like a laser beam in on all of that in their respective areas, and really call out the damaging ideas that are victimizing kids, sometimes in the name of helping kids, like Justin Danoff, who, was along with Vivek Ramaswamy founded Strive. He did our
He's going to be
ESG
speaking at our
chapter.
conference this October. He just confirmed. So look at that.
Brilliant guy.
Columbus, lives in Columbus now.
Fantastic chapter. I learned so much from it, but he talks about how so much of the ESG narrative is cloaked in we're helping the kids language.
Yeah.
It is the farthest thing from the truth. ESG destroys. I mean, he begins, I made every author begin their chapter with the story of a real life child who was victimized because we believed lies about this. And he told the story of a little girl in Sri Lanka that went from, middle class stability and provision to absolute poverty and starvation. Why? Because of ESG, because ESG priorities were leveled from the top down onto Sri Lanka and turned them into a failed state. So, I mean, it's just such a helpful resource by really the most brilliant people out there. Agree about heritage, and thank you for bringing that up. I did get one of their national policy people, Laura Reese, to write my immigration chapter.
Yeah.
And I got
Another
Delano
two-time narrative
Squires.
guest.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
you get all the good people.
Oh,
And
she's
then,
the best. Yeah.
Delano Squires wrote my chapter on race. And the reality is Delano could have written about the family because he is such a family expert. But I was like, get off my lawn, boy. You can't have the family chapter.
So I want to end with you there, Katy, because I do think of all the things that you're doing, driving that conversation back to a child's right to a mother and a father is probably the most important aspect of it. And obviously this is something Maria and I have talked a lot about. But I want to just let you just talk through what you're seeing there, why you're so passionate about that, and then I want to get into a few other aspects of what that looks like. But yeah, just talk about that chapter that you wrote.
I think that I am really, really nice so much of the time. I'm so nice. But when you start making kids sacrifice so that you can live as you please, I get really angry. And I'm amazed at the ways that I get angry. I'm amazed at how many things make me so angry when it comes to kids, whether it was like forcing them, like all of the COVID requirements that shut them out of school and out of social lives and led to, I was so angry. I'm really angry about the ways that children are victimized, both in the baby making industry and the baby taking industry. I'm so angry about education and the way that it is squandering children's minds. I'm really, really angry about what's happening on marriage and family. And that's where I chose to put my fight, because that is the place where nobody was really fighting for kids. There's a lot of people that believe that marriage is a sacred institution, that understand that the family is the building block of society, but nobody was looking at it from the perspective of child defense. So that's why we started Them Before Us, not because that's the only threat to kids, but because it looked to me like nobody was doing that thing from the perspective of we are advocating on behalf of the child. So we spend some time, at Them Before Us, we've got a whole first book about children's rights to their mother and father, how that implicates things like the definition of marriage, divorce, the rise of modern families, same-sex parenting, all the reproductive technologies, IVF, sperm donation, egg donation, surrogacy, how adoption has to be looked at through the perspective of for the kids, not for the adults. And I took all of that and smashed it into 3,000 words. I mean, really, it's kind of an impossible task. Like what I asked the authors to do.
And it's not just 3,000 words of you going, oh.
No, it's like stat, story, stat, story, stat. I mean, it was brutal. I mean, I don't want to say that I had contributors crying, but there was a little bit of weeping and gnashing of teeth going, are you kidding me? I have to cut this 600 more words. And I'm like,
Well,
yeah.
Katy, I was going to say, you spoke about me giving you 3,000 words like it was a really great achievement. And I'm like, girl, I gave you like 3,000. Cutting down, maybe people who don't write a lot don't understand this, but cutting something down is way harder and takes way more skill. And I think I gave you like 5,000 words and I was like, this is fine, right? And you were like, nah.
I know, but
It made it better. It makes it better.
Oh, it's so painful though. It's so painful. But what I love about it is I was chatting with Neil Chatterjee, who wrote my energy chapter, and Neil is like a giant. I mean, what do you want your bio to be? And he's like, just call me the Honorable Neil Chat. I mean, he's got too many stats to list in the bio. He's just been everywhere. And I look at him and what he's doing, and I'm like, you've got to narrow this down to 3,000 words. But do you know what you get from Neil? You become an expert on energy. in 3,000 words. So like, Neil, tell your people to read it because they're going to get everything you know on energy in 3,000 words. They're also going to come away as an expert on religious liberty. They're also going to leave understanding why the education system is broken and how to fix it. They're also going to understand that reproductive technologies need to be incorporated in our conversation about the protection of life. I mean, like, you actually are going to get a primer on all the big evergreen political issues from the people that know more about it than anybody else in one book. So like, that's why I'm like, it's never been done before, because I don't know if it has.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
No, that's cool.
I want to encourage everybody, don't just pre-order the book yourself. Pre-order 2 copies and send the second one to your representative. Pre-order 4 or 5 copies, because kids don't have lobbyists and kids can't hire lobbyists and kids can't be lobbyists. So order a book and send it to your representative, because that's who needs to read it.
And to your either your head of school or your
teachers union.
Yeah.
I tell all the politicians that I can get my hands on, like, dude, this is your hack, especially if you're already naturally conservative. This is your hack. You don't have to say, oh, I just don't want to raise the debt ceiling, or because I'm worried about this, or, oh, well, I want to vote against this immigrant. You say, I'm the pro-child candidate. I vote for kids. I'm sorry, I can't raise the debt. I just can't raise the debt ceiling. I am the pro-kid candidate. I'm sorry, I can't pass this commercial surrogacy bill. You know me, I'm the pro-child candidate. No, I'm going to require age verification for porn. You know me, I'm the pro-child candidate. No, I'm sorry, I'm not going to allow China to buy all the farmland. You know me, I'm the pro-child candidate, and we have to prioritize economics that allow moms and dads to spend more time with their kids, and that means economics that favor the working family. I mean, like, it is such a hack. You are welcome. Read the book, give it to and you're welcome, because you will win your elections, and you're going to look like a hero doing it, because you will be a hero doing it.
Well, since Maria teed us up there with the pre-order, I assume the book's available wherever you buy books, Amazon, all those normal places, that kind of stuff, Katy?
All the normal places, Mike.
Great.
I just got to say, and I know as a conservative, I don't love feeding the Amazon beast, but when a friend's coming out with a book, I always buy it on Amazon because it boosts the ratings. It helps get it up in the, so we'll be pre-ordering our, and actually, Katy, we'll be talking with you because we want to get you out to Ohio here soon to talk to our lawmakers about it, especially after the election. The new lawmakers coming in, because I think this framing is a really big deal.
Well, I may or may not be coming to Ohio next week to drop a certain child of mine off for college. Ooh. So I'll have reason to be there anyway.
Katy, do you want to come over for dinner? This can be edited out.
Yeah, we can look at the schedule.
Text me. Yeah. Okay.
Well, as we wrap up, then, I know all of our listeners are going to want to read this book. They're going to pre-order it. Until they get their hands on it, where can they follow your work and Them Before Us? So I need to get off of X, but I can't. So that's where you'll find me, advo_KATY at X. But Them Before Us is on all the platforms. My social media people do a great job on Instagram, which I think is the most horrible app ever. It's so counterintuitive. I don't understand. Thankfully, I've got some millennials that do. But come and follow us. Go to thembeforeus.com and subscribe. We are very busy. There are so many things happening. Like, we are trying to advocate for children in the corporate world. We've got some church curriculum that has just come out. We just started our own radio show on American Family Radio. So that's happening. We've got a documentary that we're working on with focus on the family that is going to be mass distributed globally. I mean, like, I have to keep a list. It's awesome. It's fantastic. So come and join us, because this child-centric way of looking at the world not only results in justice for the least of these, but it actually is the way to secure social thriving. I mean, like, you want a renewal? This is how you do it. You put kids first. Well, thanks so much for your work, Katy. Great to talk with you, and we wish you all the best with the book. Thanks for being a guest today on The Narrative. Thanks. We're big fans of Center for Christian Virtue. Keep it up. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Narrative, presented by CCV and produced by Wessler Media. If you found today's episode insightful, leave us a review or rating and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. We're your hosts, Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, and David Mahan, and we'll see you next time on The Narrative.